Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Martin Dreyfuss Show. Welcome back to our coverage of the Russia and Ukraine war. Today we are going to look at the main battleground city right now, Kharkiv, and how the Russian offensive looks as it stands. So without any further ado, let's get right on into the news.
A significant Russian offensive in a week. Thousands are fleeing their homes in the northeastern Kharkiv region. Russian bombs have rained down for 5 days, and invading troops are getting closer.
So as you recall, in many of these videos, Zelensky has asked for air support to prevent the intense bombing that we have seen throughout Ukraine. Kharkiv is right along the border. When you look at the map, the northern part of the Russia-Ukraine border, and is very susceptible to these bombings. To hear that anywhere is being bombed for 5 days in a row, can't put words to that. Couldn't imagine it. And I mean, we can only pray that in our lifetime we don't have to experience it. Before in this video, they did mention that it's not just thousands of people, it's, a few villages. That's where those thousands of people came from. So it might be a little more spread out than we think, since they are separated villages. Just something to keep in mind.
Keep talking to us, says this police officer to 71-year-old Olga. She was injured in an explosion, and their car is now an ambulance. They meet paramedics. We're told she's in a serious condition. The newly homeless end up...
I mean, it's not even the worst thing we've seen, of course, but I mean, who wants to see a 71-year-old woman bleeding at all? I mean, imagine your grandma like that. I mean...
up here in Ukraine's second city, Kharkiv.
People are terrified, they are stressed, they keep their animals with them. So everyone is in a huge stress because of the constant shelling and of the shock of the Russian offensive.
And this is the reality of the Russia-Ukraine war. And I'm not informed enough to say whether it's more or less so, but it definitely is taking place in the Israel-Gaza war. You see people of all ages that are going through this. This is not a war between two militaries. This is not the Revolutionary War with armies lining up and pointing muskets at each other. This is war affecting citizens, war affecting everyday people, tall, small, young, old, skinny, big. It does not matter. A lot of people who are incapable of dealing with this are involved. And that's the part that strikes hardest with me. It's not about soldiers who sign up to fight a war. It's not about governments who pay all this money to fight each other. It's about these old women who have no business walking as much as they do on a day-to-day basis right now, let alone being bombed while they're trying to do all that walking to escape.
For now, Kharkiv city is a place of relative safety. But for how long? While few think the Russians are capable of taking it, they could soon be in artillery range. Missiles routinely hit Kharkiv. If this offensive isn't contained, the destruction will be even greater. Ukraine is struggling to hold what is a new front line.
So that statement's extremely important. And why is that statement extremely important? A new front line. Because if Russia is capable of establishing a new front line, the war is shifted further in the favor of Russia. It's in a sense like if you're digging into a rock and you keep hitting it and you keep shaving off layers of it, eventually you're going to get to the center. They want to get to Kyiv. They want to get to the middle, and it's taken a long time. But if they're shaving off just another piece of the border, that's Russia moving closer to their goal. And that means more people dying, new targets opening up, new battleground cities. And, likely increased fighting. Because right now, if this is the battleground for a new border, essentially, Russia's going to do everything it can to establish it. But Kharkiv hasn't been easy to take. And I don't know if it'll happen now. I mean, I know that we in the media talk a lot about how things are destined to happen, but this has been going on for years. So we'll see.
Well, we can go straight to James now. James Waterhouse, our Ukraine correspondent, who's live for us in Kyiv. And I suppose, as I mentioned at the beginning, these weapons that Antony Blinken says are coming, these new weapons supplies, they can't come quickly enough, really, for Ukraine and for those frontline forces who are dealing with this kind of surprise offensive which has been launched near Kharkiv.
Absolutely. I mean, Ukraine, Ben, is adamant that this wasn't a surprise, that it was merely sudden, but the inescapable reality.
I mean, exactly. And I'm going to let him talk because I really want to listen to him and I want to give him the time to do so. Nothing's really a shock in war. A lot of people have more information than you'd think. Of course, things happen that are surprising, but Kharkiv is a battleground city, so, like, it makes sense to hear that Ukraine's saying it's not a surprise. Like, yeah, maybe they didn't expect it to be today, but they knew this was coming, right? I mean, this has been happening in Kharkiv.
Is that its troops are struggling to contain this joint incursion. And it's not just in the Kharkiv region. There are more than 100 evacuations planned in settlements in the Sumy region further north, where there is constant shelling in another part of Ukraine which borders Russia. And it's there that an attack is anticipated too. The dimensions of this invasion are changing dramatically in Russia's favour. Now, of course, whenever you have the military activity, you have the politics behind it. And Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State, has just gone for a working lunch close to where I am in a pizzeria with his Ukrainian counterpart, Dmytro Kuleba. Not a bad place to take an American visitor. And as you say, the tone is very much of reassurance. But the problem for Ukraine doesn't just rest with delayed American weaponry. The country admits that it's already dragging what few reserve forces it has to the Kharkiv region, where they are still struggling. So things are.
So this is important to me. It's not just happening in the Kharkiv region. That's the key words to me in all of this. And why is that the key words? Because Kharkiv is the easiest place to focus on for headlines, but I'm not limited by an hour-long show where I can only cover limited amounts of things. I am very curious about all the other regions under attack because it's the border that Russia is trying to push in. It's not just a certain spot. Russia does want the country, and so it makes sense that the new offensive is a new dimension, a dual incursion, which sounds like exactly what it means, I would think. Two separate, groups incurring into an area. Now, that probably means from different points, and that probably means they're going to kind of pinch into Kharkiv by taking, the surrounding areas and kind of slowly pushing it back, if that happens. Now, Ukraine, the key is this. Ukraine's about to get $61 billion in supplies. It's a little more than half of what they received in their first financial aid package of $113 billion that has allowed them to hold off Russia this long. So will that make the difference? Will that prevent this attack? Or will this attack succeed and then it's kind of like they have to reset up again, new defenses with all this money? What do they lose in these attacks? How much of what has been given has been spent? There's a lot of logistics here that have to be taken into account. But the fact that they're pushing in the border and it's not just Kharkiv is the key here. The fact that it was sudden, it's not surprising, but sudden is still important. That means they're having to make adjustments on the fly, move soldiers quickly, and there's a lot of things that will be taken into account, but I don't think this is going to be like the beginning of the war where we're going to have an answer tomorrow about this battle. I think this is going to be a much longer term battle.
Are looking really difficult for Ukraine in this perilous period.
And is there a sense, really, that Russia has been taking advantage of the sort of delay in getting these extra US weapons into Ukraine and using that time?
All right, I don't need to hear that question. I'm not going to put you through that. Just because obviously they're going to take advantage of it. It's a war. Ukraine by itself does not have the supplies likely to fight Russia on its own. So if they have a shortage of supplies, I mean, all right. I don't got to.
So let's talk a bit more about what are the arms and weapons that the United States is supplying to Ukraine and how they could make a difference on the front line. Well, the aid package agreed by Congress is, as we mentioned, worth more than $60 billion. It includes air defense interceptors, surface-to-air missiles designed to combat enemy bombers and reconnaissance planes. There's also more artillery, which has been in short supply as Ukrainian troops try to fight off those advances James was just telling us about. And finally, the US has sent ATACMS. Now, these are long-range, precision-guided missiles. They can strike Russian targets at a range of up to 300 kilometers.
So the question for me is, what's different from the first kinds of packages? I know they started with, lesser technology and then increased. I would imagine as the soldiers became better trained. The one that stands out to me is the surface-to-air missiles to hit planes. I'm curious if they've had that before. I would imagine that's probably the most desired thing. It's all obviously important, but I know they've gotten artillery. I forget the name, but the 300-kilometer, artillery unit things. They've had those. They've had drones. They've had almost all this stuff. I'm not sure about the surface-to-air missiles, and I wonder. That's just interesting. Typically, it always interests me when the United States introduces a new technology to someone else's war, especially against Russia, because you never know. I mean, Russia's not stupid either. Russia knows who's supplying this stuff, so it's all sadly a political balancing act behind the scenes of people dying, and so I also am thinking about that.
Separately, the European Union's agreed another 50 billion euros worth of aid after Hungary stopped blocking that deal, and the UK is sending another £500 million on top of the £2.5 billion in military aid it has already pledged to give Ukraine this year.
Look at the difference, man, in funding. And I get the GDP difference, I'm just saying.
So, let's talk then to Elena Tregub, who's Executive Director for Ukraine's Independent Defence Anti-Corruption Committee. And from Ukraine's point of view, these weapons are coming from all these different countries I've just run through, but it's still not enough.
Absolutely, it's not enough. The 6 months delay of assistance package from the US Congress caused not only Ukraine losing territories on the Eastern Front, but also significant damage to Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, Ukrainian energy infrastructure. There was a recent analysis published just yesterday that Russia doubled its effort in bombarding Ukraine with missiles and with drones in those 6 months that we were experiencing.
Two things come to my mind: extremely sad and extremely logical. Those are the two things that come to my mind. The delay in Congress's aid is obviously the open door for Russia to do what they please, and they did. The analysis says double. Now, the other thing that stands out to me is the energy infrastructure. The damage to infrastructure is the other major component of war beyond human life, because we all center resources into money. So these resources are destroyed. They're not going to be able to be reused. So you have to use new resources, which, regardless of the money, is going to make there just be statistically less resources on Earth. And then you're going to use money, which is going to inflate everybody's economy, which could significantly damage things around the world, like we've seen several times. Wars can improve economies, but also the repair can significantly damage them. So we shall see, but infrastructure really stands out to me, and then obviously doubling of bombardment is extremely scary for citizens, which is by far the most important thing going on in any war.
The assistance delay, and Ukrainian interception rate of Russian missiles fell from 70% to 46%, and therefore a lot of energy infrastructure objects were destroyed. And basically, this is emergency. We need to receive much more assistance when it comes to air defense, and this recent package does include missiles for Patriots, for NASAMS. However, it's maybe around only 10% what is urgently needed to protect Ukrainian territory from the air attack that Russia is now indeed intensified.
So,
wow. 46% missile interception rate instead of 70. You went from a 30% chance of a missile hitting anywhere in the country to a 54% chance. That's mind-boggling, right? I mean, like, think about Israel's... I mean, let's just Google it together. Has any missiles hit Israel? This is very interesting. I just feel like that's a terrible, terrible statistic.
So when you say it's not enough, is the Ukrainian position really, look, we're grateful for what you're doing to us, giving to us from the West. We're grateful for all the money, the billions that you've spent on these weapon supplies. But at the same time, we're frustrated because there has been this delay, in particular with the American weapons, and frustrated we're not getting exactly what we need to stop all these bombardments.
I think that's pretty clear that they would be frustrated. There's very clear sides in this. It's just a matter of, to me, I don't think we can weigh anything. How do you weigh human life? Let's just be completely honest about this. The two sides are don't fund Ukraine, don't fund Ukraine, let Russia win, so we stop spending the money. That's saying you're putting the money and the value of other people's economies in your life over the value of a lot of people, I would think. The other side of this is to just fund them to stop their win, or to stop Russia from taking over. And by that same token, you're going to still see a lot of people die. You're probably going to see a lot of damage to economies. And based on today's society, you don't know if that's repairable or not. So, plus, how much money would it take to really take on Russia? Because the more money you put in, the more Russia is going to, get angry, you would think, about foreign help. I would imagine that, politically speaking, this is a big deal, sending $61 billion to Ukraine. So with all that being said, it's good to know, not good, but it's important to know the scale of the war, that it's not just in Kharkiv, that it's all along the border. And it's important to know the details of, what has been sent to Ukraine, and it'll be interesting to see how this plays out in the next few days. So, thanks for tuning in.